Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Long Game, a Heated Rivalry podcast. My name is Silvan, and I'm joined with Declan. And today we're going to be breaking down episode 4 of Heated Rivalry called Rose. Now, just as a recap, this episode marks actually a 2-year span from 2014 to 2016. So here we see Shane win 2 cups back to back. We also see the infamous visit to Ilya's home, and we also get the introduction to Rose, a different character, and where Shane starts a very public relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wanted to start with how this opens up, Declan, because we do see a lot before they even open up the credits. So you see what happens in the off season between both these characters, where they're training and they're sexting each other
Yeah.
still. But there's a lot of time that passes through. So I'm curious as to how this is managed in the books, Declan, because it's really fast paced. You know, we get the span of these 2 years before the opening credits have even started, really. And there's this focus on what happens in the off season for both these characters.
So in the book, you have the privilege of being able to just like write time passing. So you can, and I think it's very similar in this. It's not, I actually kind of like the way Jacob Tierney's done it. He's done this sort of montage that gives this illusion of time passing. And it also shows that these two are still doing this, and it's been going on for a while. Now, in the book, I think it's not really even more than like a few pages. It's just sort of thrown in there. And the important elements of the relationship are obviously, kept the central focus because that's going to help with the pacing. I think Jacob Tierney's done sort of the same thing where he's kept it very condensed and sort of kept that time period condensed in like a short amount of scenes so that it's not like dragged out and it's not overly boring or overly repetitive. And so he's just taken a sort of creative way of showing that sort of time passage from the book in a way that sort of translates really nicely to TV.
I think you're right, and I think that condensation has really sort of cemented sort of the relationship as well.
Hmm.
Because how much can you really sex someone before one person loses interest?
Yeah,
Speaking of, from previous experience,
it's the
perhaps.
fact that it's still going on. It's like at this point, this is just like kind of ridiculous how long this has been going on now. And the fact that it's still sort of happening leads you to believe that these guys, there's something else there. Like this is just beyond the physical at this point. This isn't a casual relationship in the traditional sense. And the fact that they've committed to so much time together and so much sort of repetition in their relationship, yeah, it just goes to show that they are sort of clocked in a little bit and they're quite content. Well, not so much content, but they're sort of happy to maintain the status quo that's been going on at the moment.
Yeah, and you're right, because the pacing of it makes it seem like, you've got the hockey scenes initially, and that's interspersed between some of the sex
Mhm.
scenes. But from a casual viewer, it looks like, oh, they're meeting up quite regularly, but you don't actually realize these are months,
Yeah.
if not years
Hmm.
apart.
Yeah. And all the while, it leaves this impression that they're also always sort of contacting each other. They're always sort of messaging each other while this is happening. And then obviously they get those brief moments together where, they actually get to be with one another. And what's interesting is it's going to very quickly become not enough. So it is, and I think this is where Rose comes in because something needs to disrupt the sort of flow of this. Something needs to change, and she is sort of like the catalyst to let this happen. Um, because Shane is starting to realize that Ilya is not really available to him whenever he wants him to be, and you get lots of sort of input from external factors in Shane's life as well, and some for Ilya too, about, why don't you settle down? Why don't you find a nice girl? Or there's always comments about, oh, this person's dating that person, or, you know, I can set you up on this date and take you here, and yada, yada, yada. And you can very much see that the pressure is on because these guys are now starting to get into their sort of like mid to late 20s. And so the pressure to be in a long-term relationship is starting to ramp up. And because of the way in which their current situation's unfolding, they don't really have an option to do it together. They kind of have to figure out some sort of alternative relationship arrangement for themselves that don't involve each other anymore. And that's a very hard thing to do because you're breaking up this cycle that's been going on for years.
Yeah, in a way, I'm surprised Shane's mum, or momager, as I
Momager.
like to call her, hasn't PR'd this kind of a relationship with
Mm.
someone for a PR perspective. Yeah, so that's quite interesting that that hasn't happened yet, and you see it happen in this
Yeah.
episode. Not because of momager, of course, but actually, what you're talking about reminds me of that scene where Shane's with both his parents, and they're talking about going to Wimbledon the next summer or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because you see this little bit of pressure, like we can set you up. There's someone from, I don't know, royalty
Some
from
royal
Sweden
next to
going or
you. You could be
something.
dating a royal. And it's so much of this is probably one of the more toxic elements of Shane's relationship with his mother, is that she sort of turns every event in his life into a PR stunt and every aspect of his life into a PR stunt. Like, this is his sort of life, his romantic connection. You would think that she would want him to do it for love, but she's quite fixated on the idea that it's in this very public place and that it is very open, even though Shane has indicated multiple times that he's a very reserved person. I think that's a disconnect between him and his parents. They don't seem to quite understand that Shane feels differently from what they want to push out. Like, do you get the feeling that those like ads he does are like kind of awkward for him? Like, he kind of doesn't want to be there, and there's like a stiffness to him that doesn't quite look right. I feel like that is such a big aspect of his relationship with his mother, where he kind of feels pressured to take on certain roles as a result of what she sort of wants for him. And all he really wants and what he really loves is the hockey, but everything else that goes along with it, he feels this obligation to sort of do to keep her happy. That's at least the read that I got from it. Now that relationship is much less complicated in the book. The relationship between Shane and his mother is massively expanded upon on the TV show in a really good way because it makes for really strong content and it characterizes Shane a lot more as well. But you do get the feeling that, Shane doesn't want to disappoint his mother in a lot of ways, and that frustration of the fact that he's lying, the fact that he is unable to pursue the person that he actually wants, and this pressure as well coming from his mother, who's looking to turn everything into a PR stunt. Like, Shane doesn't want to go watch tennis in London, he has no interest in it, or anyone else. He sort of fobs it off, and that sort of rebellion begins to come out in that dinner that they're having. And it's so interesting because it's such a contrast to the Shane that we've seen in the exact same restaurant only a few episodes before, where he is basically saying, "Oh yeah, great, we got the Rolex thing. That's really good. Wow, okay." And you could see that he's just not bothered by it. But now it's a lot different because basically he is no longer that interested in appeasing her. He's getting more frustrated, and you can see that in the way that he's coming across.
I think it's really interesting that you noted that that's in the same restaurant because I didn't. Certainly from Shane's mum's perspective, it sounds like she wants to go to Wimbledon. He's like, I don't really care. Like, you go. And she's like, well, they're not going to invite us as the parents. You're the main attraction. So that really cements that sort of drive
Yeah.
from Shane's mum. And you're right. I love that you picked up on the advertisements and how stiff he is. Because in the first advertisement that we see in this episode, he's partially clothed, but it's like a wet t-shirt contest.
Hmm.
Like, he's all wet. And in the second one, it's an underwear ad. And again, it's very, very
Hmm.
stiff.
Yeah. It's painting this idea that he is like putting up this front that he's not being authentic, he's not being his real self, and it's coming out in this really awkward way through these advertisements. Whereas Ilya is sort of trying to drown himself in his vices and everything that he does in terms of like sex, the drink, and the partying and stuff like that, and he's sort of enjoying living his life like that until their relationship starts to get called into question, essentially, where, is it the best thing for these two to be together? Should Shane look for something different? Should Ilya look for something different? And yeah, it just creates this very interesting dynamic.
Well, there's that conversation between Ilya and Svetlana in the limo in the
Yeah.
car where she's like, "How's Jane?" kind of thing, and you really see in that montage, like, or maybe it's after the montage, I can't remember, but you know, Ilya spends his off season very differently to
Yeah.
Shane. Shane is out there doing commercials and doing all this kind of stuff, and Ilya's back home, presumably in Russia, taking care of his father in one of the
Hmm.
scenes where he's handing him water and pills and things like that. So their life is very contrasted off season. But then when it comes back to the hockey, it's the same thing
Yeah, exactly.
that draws them
They
together.
fall back into that routine. And it just shows that they come from very different worlds, and it's another difference between the two of them that's kind of stopping them from being together. Ilya is the party animal, but he's also the, parentified child. He's the one that's looking after his father. He's the one that comes from the abusive home. And then you have Shane, who is the very organized. He's very put together. He is pressured a lot. His parents have sort of drilled in a sense of perfectionism into Shane, and I do think that comes across. I think Shane is a perfectionist. Um, like you could tell from like the earlier episodes, whenever he lost to Ilya, he was like really annoyed about it, like frustrated. Not in the. I feel like Ilya takes his losses a lot better than Shane does. So he does. I feel like Shane takes his almost a little personally to himself as like their personal failures for him. It definitely comes across that way in the book. Um, but yeah, they're so different in personality and in life, and it's interesting that the only time they kind of work is whenever they're doing it this way behind closed doors, and whenever they're finding moments to be alone, and only then are they actually sort of together in any real sense. So yeah, it's curious.
Yeah, and that's when they're almost their authentic self in a
Hmm.
way. You talked about sort of behind closed doors, and immediately I think of when Shane goes to visit Ilya at Ilya's home. And there's this really funny but awkward knock on the door where he doesn't knock on the door and he knocks on the window or something like that. And I don't know if he mistakes one for the other, but I thought it was quite funny and quite
Yeah,
humorous. And then immediately he walks in, and I love Jacob Tierney for doing this, but Shane asks Ilya, "Do you want me to take my shoes off?" Like that's such an Asian drilled in thing that you do. Like you automatically take your shoes
yeah. It.
off, or at least you
I
ask.
think in Ireland and in the UK, like it's not as common a thing to take your shoes off at the door. Now that's completely changed because my boyfriend is continental European, and you take your shoes off at the door. You do not walk through the house with them on. So yeah, it's such an interesting little bit of characterization that they put in, and it matches his personality as well. He's very clean, he's very organized, he's very put together. Like he definitely takes his shoes off before he walks in his house. Um, but yeah, that whole part of that episode is also very interesting because it's Ilya letting Shane into his world in a way in which he hasn't before. And this is Ilya sort of extending the sort of, or rather developing the relationship somewhere further than it's been. And for Shane, this is like a shock because, this is not the usual flow of things. Shane is structured. Shane has a rhythm to his life. It's scheduled, and all of a sudden the schedule is interrupted, and all of a sudden this new dynamic is appearing, and he has absolutely no idea what to do with it. And I find that so interesting because in his panic, he really hurts Ilya. So he does. It creates this rift between them that just turns into this massive issue then throughout the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and I suppose before we even get to that, because there's so much to dissect with
Oh
that
yeah.
alone. But here I see this real role reversal. You know, Shane's out of his comfort zone, like you rightfully mentioned. But even in the first time they have sex at Ilya's house, you know, Ilya's very affectionate. He's very kissy. He's very
Yeah.
touchy, and you can see Shane is very cold. And normally it's the other way around, at least from previous episodes that we've
Yeah.
seen. So I thought that was really interesting how there's this complete role reversal happening here. And it makes sense that Shane might be like that because he's not in his environment.
Yeah. I think Ilya has established the rules. He is usually the controlling force within their sort of romantic encounters and whenever they're having sex or anything like that. But all of a sudden now he's changed the rules and being affectionate and being loving almost in a way and showing that sort of emotional sort of care as well, all out of the blue after being invited to his house. Like Shane doesn't seem to be someone that deals with change very well, and it seems to really overwhelm him, especially whenever Ilya is acting sort of out of character. When it's actually his true character, he is actually just he gets him the ginger ale, he makes him the tuna melt sandwich, he's caring for him, he's looking after him. And we've seen aspects of that in the earlier episodes, which then Ilya went ahead and shut right down in those earlier episodes as well, through like that hotel scene, where he sort of reestablished the sort of control of the relationship and you had that last line, the "we didn't even kiss," but now he's just sort of turned it on its head. Like they're both kind of all over the place at the minute. Ilya doesn't really know what he's doing or why he's doing this. All he knows is that he sort of wants to, and he's trying it out with Shane. And Shane is like, "What the hell is going on? I don't understand. This isn't part of the agreement. This is getting messy. You're freaking me out because you're making me, think that we have a chance at feelings here." And you get that blind panic then.
Yeah, and like you said, Ilya is in his environment, and Ilya is by nature a caretaker. So
Hmm.
as I was watching this the first, the second, and even the third time, you know, the notes on Ilya being a caretaker just kept coming because we see that, with Ilya's father, he's caring
Hmm.
for his father, and when he's not caring for his father, literally he's also paying for his treatment or paying his brother to look after him. So he's making sure other people are
Yeah.
good. And when you extend this to what I call the tuna melt scene, which, by the way, I had no idea, as a vegetarian, no idea what a tuna melt was. I had to Google this. Do you know what a tuna
It's
melt
just like tuna
is?
and cheese.
I did not know this. I did not know there was cheese. It's a grilled cheese sandwich
I
with
hate tuna.
tuna.
No. Someone made me a sandwich like that
Also,
there.
who's
Divorce
kissing?
immediately.
Well, well, who's also kissing after eating tuna? But
Oh,
anyway,
no, no.
but when we see this scene here with the tuna melt, before we get into that, I would like you, and I apologize for people who are listening to this and not watching this, but can you count on your fingers up to 2 for me and show the camera? Okay, cool. So you do it like most, I think 99% of the
Yeah.
population does. You stick your index finger up and then your middle finger. Have you noticed Ilya counts from his little finger backwards?
Is that to do with the way that
So
Russian's
it's
spoken and
one,
written?
two. Is
I
it?
have
I
no
don't
idea.
know.
I was just guessing.
We
I,
need
I
we need someone who
have no
speaks
idea yet.
Russian on
All
here to
Russian
help us
speakers out there,
out.
please verify whether or not that's why he does that.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting. I don't know if it was a stylistic choice or just a kind of story thing that he does. So I thought it was really interesting, something I picked up on. And then I got validated by someone's TikTok, so that helped. But when we see this, I mean, TikTok validates most of my life now. But when we see this scene, when coming back to the caretaking, he makes sure that Shane he's bought food for
Mm.
Shane, but he's also bought ginger ale specifically. He's asking Shane if it's cold enough, which means he's thinking, have I put it in the fridge long enough?
Yeah.
Did I buy it soon enough? He's taking care of Shane in a way that we haven't seen before, and in a way that maybe Shane isn't accustomed
And
to.
it freaks him out. So it does scare Shane that because Shane likes it. He does like being looked after and he likes being cared for, but coming from someone that, is having such, complex feelings about it. I think as well the fact that Ilya's father is relying so much on him at this point in time, and Ilya's beginning to feel quite vulnerable. I think it's not a coincidence that he's now chosen this moment to sort of open up to Shane. He's realized that outside of Svetlana, there isn't really anyone else he can rely on or that he can talk to about this stuff. And so, whenever Ilya does sort of return to the sofa, then he takes that opportunity to, after the conversation with his father, his brother, takes the opportunity then to open up to Shane a little bit about what's been going on in his life, only for Shane to run out on him. And it's
Oh my gosh.
absolutely awful. It's emotional immaturity at its worst, and it's sort of typical of Shane. Yeah, it's the two of them have created a really toxic dynamic, and it's resulted in this sort of situation now where neither of them really know when is the right time to say things or to not say things, and it's all become so messy as a result of it. And now everyone's hurt, and Shane's hurt, Ilya's hurt, and they've created a real mess out of nowhere. And the solution is apparently to jump ship.
Well, and before we get to jumping ship, aka Rose, I want to break down that conversation that Ilya has with his
Hmm.
father, because I think there was so much to that, and not just in the content, but in the way it was shot
Yeah.
as well. Ilya is in a wide pan shot, and he's in the right hand corner of this
Hmm.
shot. And it's a very artistic choice, and I'm pretty sure it was deliberate. But when I looked into it and I kept watching it over and over again, it makes Ilya's character seem really small, and that he's not taking up a lot of space around him.
Yeah.
And for me, putting Ilya in that side of the frame really pushes him into the corner of the shot. And there's a lot of psychological sort of undertones to that, where you've got a lot of negative space or space that isn't
Yeah,
being used. And for me, that represents, that sort of isolation that Ilya
yeah,
feels, that Ilya has, especially in, when it comes to sort of, taking care of his father and being alone and doing that alone. And there's this emotional distance between the relationship between him and his father, where, Ilya doesn't take up much
yeah.
space.
He deliberately makes
I feel
himself
like,
small, so he does in their relationship.
yeah,
He never challenges his father. He just goes along with what he wants. And it's also a way of showing his vulnerability as well. Like the only person that seems to be able to get under Ilya's skin really is his father. Even his brother in a lot of ways. Like he has plenty of fire to throw back at him whenever he's having his phone calls. But his father, he just takes it on the chin every single time. And it makes him small. It makes him vulnerable, but also so almost childlike. It's like those conversations with his father reduce him back to being a child, where it's just, yes, dad, okay, dad, yes, dad, I will do that, dad, you're right, dad. And it's just that really sad sort of belittling of himself that you see going on. That's a result of their relationship.
yeah, there's this regression that you see for Ilya back to being more childlike, but even his body language when he's having this conversation, it's tense. You can see the tension in his face, in his neck, for example. And it's very controlled. Like he contains his language. He doesn't lash out at his father in a way that you might expect him to do in that kind of
Hmm.
situation. But it very much contrasts the Ilya we've seen where he's confident and he's bold and he takes up space and he's loud. And so for me, this sort of dialogue is almost like a reminder that in Ilya's father's world, or even maybe in Russia, on the Russia
Hmm.
side of it, Ilya exists within the margins of it. He's learned to survive by making himself smaller.
Yeah, by hiding himself. Yeah.
Even when he returns back to Shane, there's this moment where he shakes it off almost.
Hmm.
So it's almost like a nervous system regulation thing that happens there, where he shakes it off, he fixes himself, and then he goes
It's
back to
almost like
caring for
it's
Shane's
almost like he's
needs.
putting the mask back on again. And very curiously, he then takes it off again for Shane whenever Shane asks him. So he does, and Ilya does finally begin to actually reveal things to Shane that he's never revealed before. And Shane's response is to freak out because all of a sudden he doesn't know who this person is. He doesn't know this very kind, nurturing, vulnerable person, and he cannot square these sort of versions of Ilya with each other. The sort of cocky one that wears the mask and always has a quick wit to sort of snap back with, and trying to square it with this other version that he's now seeing of vulnerability and sweetness and um, you know, a little bit of sadness as well. Like that for Shane is disconcerting because he doesn't know how to deal with it. He's not had a relationship like this before, and their previous dynamic has not sort of given space for this kind of thing to occur.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Ilya sort of instigates this by calling him Shane for the first time. I think that's the first
Yeah,
time I hear
yeah,
him
yeah,
say
it is.
his
Yeah.
first name. But then Shane responds in the same way, so he says Ilya in
Hmm.
return. And so I can see how this whole episode is sort of built up to this, or even the episodes preceding this have built up
Yeah,
to this, where there is this moment of emotional vulnerability. And when that's reciprocated, like you said before, Ilya takes things off the chin. He's okay with things. He can, keep going. Where it's Shane that sort of freaks out, pulls back almost immediately. I mean, the guy is still straddling him, let's be
yeah.
honest, and he's literally like, can't do this. But I wanted to ask you, how many times in real life, because that is quite accurate, has someone had like a freak out like that or felt there's a moment of, I can't do this, I don't want to do this anymore, and literally pulls the rug under another person? Because I know I've probably been in both those scenarios.
Yeah, I've definitely been in a scenario where I pulled the rug 100%. I think a lot of it comes down to like a defense mechanism. So it's like you're trying to protect yourself from something. And I think in Shane and Ilya's situation, it's Shane trying to protect himself from the pain of the inevitable end of this relationship, even if it does become something more. Like at this point, they're already in love with 100%. They're in love with the versions of themselves that they see. And I think this new like layer being peeled back has made Shane like Ilya even more. And now he's freaking out because he's going to get his heart smashed to pieces when this thing blows up. And it has to blow up because in Shane's world, they cannot be. There's no, they have not even, he's not even entertained the idea. He's not even thought about it at this point. You know, what would their relationship look like? How would they make it work? In his head, it's, well, it wouldn't. It's just not going to work. We can't be together. And now Ilya is trying to develop this relationship to a position where both of them could be hurt really, really badly. And Shane is immediately going into his sort of like avoidant state where he's like, no, I'm not dealing with this. Goodbye. I'd rather not have to deal with the emotions. I'm backing away and sorry, that's it. I need to protect myself. And, you know, realistically, in a real life situation where they couldn't work out and where things just would never get better and they risk losing so much, what Shane does is really cruel in the way he does it. And I don't appreciate the way he does it. I don't think it's fair on Ilya, and I think it's really poorly timed. But him withdrawing at that moment, whenever the emotion is getting very serious and very deep, is correct. It is the right decision to actually make in like a logical sense. But, you know, love's not logical.
See, I'm going to play devil's advocate
Mm-hmm.
here, and I think that's actually a really typical Shane response. Because if we look at the moments just preceding that, they're on the couch. Ilya is sort of like playing with Shane's hair. They're sort of watching TV, and I'm like, oh, this is a really nice, tender
Mm-hmm.
moment. Shane can't handle that. Shane starts to touch Ilya's thigh and makes it sexual.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, he can't tolerate the emotion there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think, there is an ownership of Shane, like not being able to tolerate it, but that's also really realistic for guys in that age bracket, perhaps, or guys with that experience or lack of experience
Mm-hmm.
in terms of emotional sort of
Yeah.
intelligence, for example, where, if you can't deal with the emotional side, you make it sexual because that's something that you can control. That's something that you know how
Mm-hmm.
to deal
Yeah.
with, that makes sense, and that feels safer in a way. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times, and I'm not going to include myself, of friends who have hooked up with guys and then said, I didn't even know his name. So, I mean, there
Yeah.
is that sort of distancing
It's,
there.
yeah, it's the thing about their relationship now, though, is that it's been going on for a while. And this has been happening over and over and over again. And this is Shane trying to do what Ilya did in the hotel, which is sort of take control back of the situation and turn it back into this sort of just sexual dynamic and away from the romance, away from the affection, away from the emotion. And he does it really badly. So he does, because what they end up doing is having like a really intimate, tender moment on the sofa then. And whenever they're at the end of it, they're having this like really emotional like bit of silence between each other where they're just sort of being in each other's company. And then he really freaks out because it's like, oh my God, that didn't work. I need to get out of here now because actually that made it worse. And all of a sudden, my feelings have just sort of exploded at this point, and I need to get the hell out of the situation immediately. So I think
Yeah,
it's at that point Shane realizes that there is absolutely no turning back now. Ilya has completely changed the
yeah,
relationship. He's changed the dynamic. They can no longer be together in the way that they were before because
yeah,
they're too close now. And there is no way of returning to that state without addressing it. And Shane doesn't like to address things directly. He is an avoidant and he will try to skirt his way around it and find ways of not being in Ilya's company and not having to have those awkward conversations or those difficult conversations. It's the same with the relationship he has with his mum and his parents. He doesn't want to have the awkward conversations about what he actually wants or what actually wants to do. He doesn't challenge, very rarely challenges. He sort of just goes with the flow. He doesn't even challenge on the ice whenever he's in hockey. He doesn't fight. He doesn't really argue. There's like very few moments where Shane is actually like confrontation with somebody. You have that one scene with Scott in the previous episode, where he has like the most beige insult ever thrown at Scott, and Scott just like cuts his knees out from under him. And the commentator makes the commentary of like, "Oh, that's very unusual for Hollander to get in a fight. Like we've never seen this before." And he is so unconfrontational that his immediate response is just to run away, and that's exactly what he does. And per Ilya, like I don't think Shane realizes how badly a moment that he's chosen to do this.
right,
Like Ilya invited
right.
Shane over because he needed him at that point in time. He needed him emotionally. Um, he needed that support, that he needed the boyfriend. And
One of the yeah,
all of a sudden, Shane like rejects him in the worst possible way. And
yeah.
thinking of Ilya's current mental state when he does that, oh my God, it's not good. It's not good.
It's rejection on two parts. It's rejection from his family, but now it's rejection from someone he cares very much for. In a way, this reminds me of, like, you know, when you watch like a rom-com and one, or not even a rom-com, but a TV show or a movie where one person says, I love you, and the other's like, oh, thanks. It kind of reminds me of that. It's like I'm putting something out there and I've just been rejected, and it's hurtful and it's hard. But even thinking about sort of the response afterwards, and this is where like Connor Story is a phenomenal
Yeah,
actor.
yeah.
You know, when he says Hollander and he just says the name twice, but there's such a nuance. Like the first one feels like, really? You're gonna go? Really? Seriously? And then when he says it again, there's this don't
Please don't
go
leave. Yeah,
behind it.
yeah. And it's so
Yeah.
heartbreaking. And you get so mad at Shane for what he does and how he does it. Even though
But
he's
what,
rationalized it in his head as to this is the right decision, but he's not making the decision out of practicality, he's doing it out of fear. So he is, and
yeah.
that fear is driving him to make all the wrong choices. And then enter left field Rose, which
Speaking of wrong
so
choices, no, I'm kidding.
perfectly timed. Honestly, imperfectly timed, you could almost say, like for Shane, because he has come to the conclusion now that if he can't have Ilya, he doesn't want anyone else. So he is just going to try to be straight. He's just, if I can't have a man in any way or form and it can't be Ilya, then I'm not going to try and date men. I'm just going to try and date women instead, which, well,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely is going to work for him.
What was your. I really like the character of Rose, and I like the way she's introduced. I think she's introduced in a really smart way because of what she talks about.
Hmm.
So when we see Rose in the booth at the restaurant, which Shane doesn't even go out, the fact that he goes out and he starts drinking is a whole nother
Yeah.
level. But, you know, when we see Rose Landry, you know, they say like she's filming something like X Squad, and I thought that's a little too X-Men Suicide
Yeah.
Squad-y.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you could have picked a better name. Like, that's my only thing with the writing, was like, really, that's the name. But anyway, you know, when we see that, oh, I do like the Bill Paxton reference, because in reality he would have died a year after that scene would have happened. So the fact that she's filmed a movie with Bill Paxton sort of took me back to like Titanic and
Yeah.
Twisters, or Twister rather. But you know, Rose immediately engages him in deep conversation in those scenes. There's no small talk. So for me, Shane doesn't have to sort of work hard at
Hmm.
sort of masking in a way.
Yeah.
But even when Rose talks, she, you know, the commentary that she makes is on women in the film industry, or in her industry, not being able to eat certain food because she won't be able to fit in her
Yeah.
costume the next
Yeah.
day. And I thought, there's a whole layer that Jacob Cherney is bringing in here, and it's such a feminist type of writing from a female
Yeah.
gaze, I thought, because, you know, and then she comments on sort of the lack of diversity for female roles, and that she's been kidnapped in 4 movies already, kind of thing. And I really like the way she's introduced here.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in the book, though.
Um, in the book, she's also quite like a bright personality. Shane talks about her a lot in the way that he just really, really likes her. Like he just likes the kind of person that she is. And it's portrayed very well in the show as well, because she is immensely likable. That which is something that absolutely needed to get correct, because keep in mind this woman is going to be the obstacle between our two main love interests, and you don't want to turn her into a villain. You don't want to turn her into some demon that's keeping them apart. And so I think the way that they approached her character was done very well, with a lot of care. She is smart. She's really insightful. She's kind. She's patient. She's funny. She is genuinely everything you'd want in a girlfriend. So you can sort of see why Shane chooses to gravitate towards her, and was thinking, maybe I can just try with Rose because I actually like her, and maybe I can turn that into something else. You can sort of see Shane's internal logic sort of running through his head as he's sort of meeting her and making this new friend, which he then allows to turn into something different. Um, but yeah, I think the way that they did her character was done very well, and I think it was quite true to the books. Again, a little bit more expanded upon We get a lot more of the conversation between the two rather than just saying that they had conversation. That was really good. And it was portrayed really well. And I liked that their first meeting was extended out a bit more than from the books. You really get a better sense of Rose's personality and the kind of person that she is. Yeah, I think she was done really well. And I'm glad that Jacob Tierney had the foresight not to try to like demonize her or turn her into this basically whooping post for their bad relationship. Yeah, definitely a smart move of Rose, I think.
Yeah. I think where I differ in my appreciation for Rose is her choice in friends in Miles. I get the ick. I get the ick with Miles in the nightclub. Let's go to the nightclub. I love this opening scene where you have Ilya sort of walking into the nightclub and you have the tattoo song, All the Things She Said, playing. I immediately screamed. I'm not going to lie about
That
this.
was just absolute peak song choice. Like, it just says everything. A song that's all about struggles between two lesbians in the closet, like in love with each other and not being able to be together. What?
And the way they shoot this scene and they pair it with them, and I'm gonna get into this, but even, and I, as a avid fan who's consuming a lot of Heated Rivalry sort of interviews and fan edits and everything, I immediately go back to the premiere of the show where, there's three of them, there's a few more of them on the panel.
Mhm.
And they ask Connor Story, I don't know if you've seen this, they ask Connor Story, like, oh, what would Ilya's theme song be or something? And Ilya's like, Connor Story is like, you know what? I really like him to sing the tattoo song, All the Things She Said, and he sings like 4 bars, and you don't think anything of it. And I'm like, was that a cue?
Yeah, I didn't
Was
know
that
that.
just
Yeah.
by chance? I'll send it to you later. And I immediately go back to that point, and I'm like, oh my effing god, they used the
Clever,
song.
clever sort of spoiler put in there, so he did.
Or genuinely didn't know it was going to be
That's
used. There's
true,
lots of
yeah,
fan theories
because
out there. I don't know who's
a lot
right.
of that music comes sort of post production, so it would come during the editing. But I don't know. Sometimes they'll write into scripts what music will be playing, so that the actors get an idea of sort of the mood and the feeling and stuff behind it. So I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them to try and drop the little hint in there just to see. But yeah, I would say they spent
Let me
all
live in
their
my
sort of
fantasy.
licensing money on that song alone. So they did because it was such an
And
excellent choice and it was perfect for the mood. And it just fully
right.
captured the moment that was happening. You have two queer people that just cannot be together, longing and yearning for each other in the middle of a dance floor.
And then to use the Harrison cover, which to me almost represented Shane's inner monologue, was, I thought, genius.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Because it's a male
It's the
singer
male
singing the
the
same
male
song.
equivalent of it happening. Yeah, yeah. It's it was very, very clever. So it was I can see why everyone loved it. It was such an amazing moment and really memorable as well. And yeah, that whole nightclub scene is just there's so much in it. And then the
Yeah.
sort of it takes it back to the beginning of the episode where you had the contrast of their lives going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then you have it again at the end where you're seeing how their lives are contrasting now that they're sort of not together anymore, where the sex scenes are no longer happening with, they're no longer happening with each other. They're happening with different people. Ilya's having it with himself because obviously he couldn't bring himself to. I know. Did you notice that as well? At the end of the night, Shane is with Rose. At the end of the night, Ilya is by himself. He doesn't take that girl home, probably because has no interest in her, and the only person that he did have an interest in has gone home with somebody else. He's probably quite heartbroken at that point in time. And it's so hard to watch as someone that's trying to root for these characters to be together, and a really bitter pill to swallow that they've allowed themselves to get to this point now in the relationship where they are literally doing anything but doing what they want, which is to be together. I think, yeah, Shane in
I
particular
like
is
that.
he looks so emotional in this scene. I think the way Hudson Williams plays it, like Shane is by nature because there is like there's definitely a sense that Shane is on sort of like the autism spectrum. He's somewhere on here, and that he doesn't always sort of outwardly express his emotions in the same way that other people do. which when you actually see how Hudson Williams is in real life, he's very animated, and how he manages to draw that back and completely express all his emotion through his like facial features, through his eyes, and through just his little sort of things that he does with his face, how he's able to portray that emotion. You can see that Shane is devastated watching Ilya on that dance floor. So he is. You can see it in his eyes. You can see it in the performance. And it's so sad. And yeah, the way the whole thing plays out is just the perfect wrap up to this sort of break in their relationship, which has happened.
Yeah, and I think, especially when you're talking about that sort of that sex scene between Shane and Rose, and can I just go on a side quest here? The actress that plays Rose has a gorgeous ass. Like when
Oh
she's
yeah,
walking up
yeah,
the stairs
yeah.
and she seductively drops the dress, I was like,
Oh,
I could be swayed, maybe. I don't know. But second to Ilya, I think she has the second best ass in the whole
oh
show for
yeah.
me.
Oh, the Garrett's definitely, yeah, 100%. They got good representation in there as well.
But I think, and my question is because this is what I was thinking about when they were having that sex scene where they have, the shot of Ilya and then Connor and their faces sort of go back and forth. Do you think Shane is
Yes.
thinking of Ilya when he's having
I knew what you were
sex
going to
with
say before you
Rose?
said it. Yes, I think the idea of cutting it in between is to show that they're actually thinking about each other while this is happening. So Shane is thinking about Ilya in the shower, and Ilya is thinking about Shane. So 100% you're right. It was definitely cut to portray that, which is just, it's not good, is it?
It's not, but actually, it adds this whole other layer to it because, I mean, I've never done that in real life, I'm going to be honest, but I can see why somebody might, like, I get the appeal of it.
Trying to get
And for
yourself
someone like
through it.
Shane,
Yeah. You see,
yeah, either, okay, get hard or get there or get to that point where you
get
could.
yourself to the point where you're actually working and you're actually able to participate. It's This is where I lose it with Shane a little bit. He is making incredibly selfish decisions, and he's doing it out of a place of fear. And fear dominates so much of Shane's life, like his fear of disappointing his parents, his fear of losing hockey, his fear of getting hurt in his relationship with Ilya. But his fear leads him to make worse decisions. So it does. He thinks he's protecting himself, but he's sacrificing everyone around him to try and do it. And he's not thinking about Rose's feelings in this. So
Mm.
he knows he's not going to be able to give us all the Rose, but he's still carrying out this relationship. He's still going through with it. He knows he's hurting Ilya by doing it, but he's doing it anyway because he would, he's just so internalizing. He's just so internal in himself. He's just so wrapped up in his own world. And this fear of what's going to happen if he sort of lets his relationship and his feelings with Ilya develop. And you do get the feeling that Ilya is sort of the more emotionally intelligent out of the two. And I think you can see it here as well. Now, Ilya is trying to be petty with Shane when he goes and tries to find a girl in the club. He's trying to make him jealous, completely backfires, and he ends up being the one that goes home alone. But Shane can be very selfish in his decisions, so he can, and it is coming out of a place of fear, so you can empathize with that. And it does make him a much more layered character. But you will see that, yeah, it's his sort of lack of emotional intelligence that's causing this sort of issue to happen. I mean, Shane should be self aware enough not to drag Rose into this, but he's doing it anyway, all to sort of protect himself from his feelings in relation to Ilya's relationship with him.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because for me, it's almost like it adds this layer of authenticity for me because Shane gets hurt, so he hurts Ilya in return. So when they've got the scene at Ilya's house and Ilya's talking about other girls that he slept with, and then he talks about Svetlana, and we get a little bit of backstory for Svetlana, you can see Shane or Hudson making the choice, perhaps in the acting. Shane retreats. He gets quiet when he's
Mm.
processing or when he's hurt. And that's very typical of a lot of people, not being on the spectrum or not, regardless of that. But that is very typical because I identify with that.
Yeah.
And not to get you really psychodynamic with this, but it's interesting how I'm really coming through this episode feeling connected to Shane because of some of the ways he's portraying, the ways he's being
Yeah.
portrayed, but also I'm feeling huge amounts of empathy for Shane. And also for Ilya, of course, but I'm much more interested in the dynamic between Ilya and his father in this episode here. Whereas you're really almost disappointed with Shane or irritated with some of the choices he's
Yeah, but
making.
that's my personality. I am like a moral exceptionalist. So I am like, which is not always a good thing, but it's a very understandable thing that Shane's doing. They're very human responses to what he's going through and what he's experiencing. He's doing it all out of a place of, a negative perspective on his life and what's going to happen, and this fear of the unknown. And his choices are completely and utterly understandable. So they are. But ultimately they're still his choices and they still end up hurting people. And so
Yeah,
it's kind of like, how much are we letting him off the hook here? How much? I mean,
yeah,
he's dragged Rose into this. He has really hurt Ilya in this episode as well, even though he was doing it in response to what Ilya sort of said to him. But Ilya, I think, is just lacking in self-awareness. That's just sort of the way he is. And yeah, it creates a very complex dynamic around him, so it does, which is interesting because that means that he's a three-dimensional character that actually has flaws, which you're supposed to have. I mean, nobody's perfect. And you can see how messy and just destructive this relationship is being. And funny, it's not coming from the outside world, it's coming from within. So it is. Shane and Ilya are assuming that the thing that would break apart their relationship is if something were to happen, if they were to be found out, and they'd have to deal with all the toxicity around hockey fans and all the way that homophobia is treated in the media and sports personalities and just the general wider sort of entertainment sphere and how they would be treated in that way and how that would ruin the relationship and ruin what they have. They're doing it to themselves. So they are completely and utterly, they are creating more issues than what they actually have. And I think that is kind of what this episode is trying to establish, is that a lot of the destruction of the relationship is self-destructive. It's coming from within. It's the fear of things that haven't even happened yet, which are ruining this dynamic, which, they are already in love with each other, like big time, and they enjoy each other's company. They enjoy the time they spend together. They are constantly sort of in contact, even when they're not seeing each other physically. And it's that fear that it will be taken from them or ruined for them in some way that's actually causing them to ruin it themselves. And so, in that sense, it perfectly makes sense why Shane is making these decisions and why he's having such poor outcomes, because this is what's meant to happen. You're blowing it up yourself. Like, you did this.
yeah. And I like that there's this introspection, and how you talked about sort of it's coming from within. Yes, it's definitely being destructed from the inside out
Hmm.
in a way. And this is what I love about being able to talk to someone else in the fandom about it, because this kind of conversation gets me excited. Knowing that you're irritated with Shane and I'm like, oh, I'm not so irritated with him this week. Like, that's interesting to me. Like, what's going on behind that? And I think that's what this sort of whole phenomenon has created, and especially through like social media, where you've got actual conversations about some of this stuff going on.
Hmm.
That's what interests me. It's what happens to real life people when they talk about this show, and what does that bring up for them?
Yeah, yeah. For me, it's a lot to do with the sort of selfishness of Shane's decisions. That's what annoys me about the way that he's acted in this. He's been so reckless with everybody else's feelings just to sort of protect himself. And you can completely understand why, but just because you understand something doesn't justify it. So that is sort of that's where I come from in life. Like, if I'm wronged, I can have enough empathy for someone to understand why they did something, but I'm not letting you off the hook just because I know why you did something. An explanation is not justification. So, unfortunately, Shane, you're just on my shit list for this episode anyway. You have two more to pull it back. Don't worry about it. I have faith in you. I think you're genuinely a good guy, but you're going to need to make up for some of this mess that you've made.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next and how, because there has to be some sort of coming together or resolution, and I'm interested in how that might play
Hmm.
out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got 2 episodes to, these characters have 2 episodes to sort their shit
Oh,
out.
100%, yeah. And based on where they are in the book at the minute, like I know what happens in terms of how this all like more or less gets resolved, but it's actually quite a dense part of the book, so seeing how it gets paced out and stuff like that there will be interesting. Right, so we're gonna wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening. And we're flying through these episodes, but we're really enjoying having our sort of deep dives and getting to talk about it more. So if any of you guys have any thoughts on this stuff, by the way, make sure you leave comments, ask questions, sort of get more of our perspectives. If there's someone that we mentioned that you sort of want to hear more about, then let us know. Keep an eye out for the next episode. We'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And if anyone who is Russian out there, please tell us if you wear shoes
Yeah,
indoors
like,
as
is
well.
there a reason why he kind of backwards on his fingers, or is just like a little Ilyaism?
Thanks everyone.